There are good carbs and bad carbs, good proteins and bad proteins, good fats and bad fats. No one does well when you just cut one of those out altogether. But it really is about the quality.
Hi, it's James here from Food Matters, and today I'm going to be speaking with Ocean Robbins. Ocean and his father are the founder of the Food Revolution Network. This is an online community and research group dedicated to helping you understand how to improve your health by moving towards a more natural, whole foods, plant-based diet. Ocean and his father have been dedicated to raising awareness and consciousness in this space for so many years. In fact, his father's book was a big catalyst in my journey, Diet for a New America, and we've had so much to do over the years together. And I'm so excited to be speaking with Ocean today about a very, very important topic that's becoming more and more popular because of how it influences so much of our day-to-day lives, and that is inflammation. Understanding its mechanics in terms of how it impacts your body, understanding how chronic inflammation, which is almost this healing response, if left turned on, can cause so much damage and go from something that's simple as aches and pains and issues to cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, dementia, etc. So we're going to be talking about all these mechanisms, plus diving deep into the practicalities of how to sort of reverse this overactive healing response and create a more beautiful, natural healing environment in our own bodies from understanding how to take control of our kitchens. Ocean Robin, how are you?
Oh, I'm so glad to be with you, James. What a great topic and what a great event. Thanks for having me on here.
No, it's great. Great to chat as per usual. I always learn so much and so many little tips and tricks from you. Let's talk about inflammation. Can you tell me what is inflammation in the body and what causes this sort of response in the body?
Well, at its core, inflammation is like your body's security system. And if you've ever gotten a bruise and seen swelling happen, that's inflammation. And it's actually a healthy response to a problem. It's a little bit like your house is being broken into by burglars and you have an alarm that goes off, and if things get really bad, the police get called, and they to come deal with the problem. And that's all well and good. You need healthy inflammation. If your body didn't know how to respond to an invasion or a problem, everything would break down and you'd be dead within a matter of minutes. But so you're constantly dealing with invaders and pathogens and issues that are out of balance and creating healthy inflammation to respond to it. The trouble is that when you have chronic inflammation, it's a little bit like your security system is sounding the alarm 24 hours a day. And eventually you get splitting headaches and your body's kind of stressed out by all the noise. You can't actually hear if there's a real problem because you're so inundated with the noise from the hyperreactivity. And your police force, if they keep coming out to your house all the time, they get exhausted, they get worn out. It's a little bit like the boy who cried wolf. You stop showing up, right? And then you get a whole new set of problems. So chronic inflammation creates essentially swelling within your body. It creates a systemic overreaction, and that can manifest as our aches and pains, stress. It can manifest eventually as cardiovascular disease. It can create the conditions where you're more likely to develop cancer, more likely to develop Alzheimer's. Inflammation in the brain can create the conditions where plaque builds up in your brain, and eventually it can lead to Alzheimer's. It can also trigger strokes. So these are serious problems. So what starts out as like a little annoyance here or there that never quite goes away gets worse. And most of us think it's normal that the older we get, the more pain we'll have in our bodies. The less well we'll sleep, the more uncomfortable we'll be. And some of that is chronic inflammation that over time builds up. And often, it's like a little injury here or there that your body never really got to process or resolve completely. And it creates this hyperreactivity. But over time, it becomes system-wide. Your entire body becomes inflamed. And that's what gets concerning, because most inflammation is a response to a local issue or a bunch of local issues at first. But over time, systemic inflammation that becomes chronic is what gets really dangerous.
And this is fascinating because as I know for you and I, we've done multiple years of research in this space. And the more I learn, the more I understand that the body is just trying to heal. And all of the things that happen in our body is the body's response to healing. And even when we start to really understand the mechanics of autoimmune conditions, that's the body, trying to attack things that aren't meant to be there. It's trying to heal itself. Or you see a tumor and that's a healing response. Or you see like the arterial plaque get put on the walls of the artery. That's your body trying to heal that weakened artery because it's been broken down over time. And it's just using circulating natural cholesterol to do that. But we see these responses as dangerous and bad. We see inflammation as evil. But inflammation is our friend, but then it switches over to becoming evil, right? When it becomes chronic. How is it that inflammation becomes chronic? And how do people know if they have chronic inflammation?
Just to play with that metaphor for a second more, I often think of it like every country needs to defend itself. And so we need a military, perhaps, to protect ourselves. But if a country spends all of its resources on the military, or is constantly bombing everybody else, then it won't have food for its people, right? Or take care of its environment. And so it's almost like inflammation is perpetually being in a state of war, in a state of reactivity. And it's very hard to constantly fight a war and also build peace, and also build health and build wellness. And so we've got this hyper-reactive environment. Now, you need a healthy defense system. It's just got to be in the right balance. And unfortunately, a lot of us are out of balance. Now, what's causing all this hyperinflammation? Well, one thing that a lot of people don't talk about as much that really deserves more attention is actually animal products, and particularly meat. So I want to talk about a few studies on this. So C-reactive protein is a protein that the liver makes when there's inflammation in the body. And blood measurements of CRP, or C-reactive protein, are often performed to assess the risk of heart disease. And what we see is that elevations of CRP are directly linked to meat consumption. It increases them. There was a study that looked at mice, and they found that an amino acid found in high levels in meat, methionine, increased oxidative stress and inflammation, and actually reduced heart strength in the mice. And then we have studies on humans that have shown that higher levels of arachidonic acid, which is another mediator that promotes inflammation and aging, are promoted by a meat-centered diet. So a diet low in or absent in meat was recommended by the researchers for optimal health. And then there's insulin resistance, which of course leads to diabetes. It's what happens when your body's cells don't respond properly to the hormone insulin. And it's the driving factor that leads to type 2 diabetes, as well as gestational diabetes and prediabetes. And when scientists have looked at how our bodies respond to the insulin that we produce, we find that protein-rich and fat-rich meats trigger the body to become less insulin sensitive. So a lot of folks talk about reducing sugar consumption, which is critically important if you're wanting to fight type 2 diabetes and a lot of other issues. But we also have to look at insulin sensitivity. And it turns out that your body can handle sugar far more effectively when its insulin sensitivity is present. But when your insulin sensitivity goes down, which happens when you essentially have more animal products in your diet, that's the bottom line here, then you become less capable of handling it. Here's the metaphor I use. People often say, eat less carbs and your blood sugar will do less spiking. Well, that makes sense. It's a little bit like saying drive less and you'll have less car accidents. But if you become a better driver, then you can drive and not have car accidents. And so getting your insulin sensitivity in balance is like getting to be a better driver. And at the end of the day, I would rather have a body that can handle some sugar effectively than a body that can't. And so
of course,
that's what we're looking at here. And so meat consumption tends to be directly correlated to insulin resistance, which then leads to diabetes and more inflammation in the body.
So one of the things that's coming up for me as you mention these things is this idea that, meat consumption can contribute to these issues. But I think what I found so fascinating in a lot of the research that I've done is that the type of meat that we've eaten has changed, because people will say, well, we've always eaten some meat and we've always had this, it's natural, but it's like what we feed the animals now causes inflammation in those animals. They're eating corn, wheat, soy-based diets, which is not really their natural diet, which is high in omega-9s, low in omega-3, and these essential fatty acids in balance, support an anti-inflammatory environment in the body. So if we're creating animal products that are inflamed, animals that are inflamed, then we're eating those inflamed animal products. Surely that's contributing to this sort of chronic inflammation we're suffering from. Can you explain this process a little bit more for people that might not be aware of this?
Sure, absolutely. So it's true that the meat that most people in the industrialized world are eating is completely different from the animal products that our ancestors ate when they came from the wild, or even when they roamed around in pasture. An animal that is cooped up, fed a totally unnatural diet, and unable to move, will become very high in fat. Just think about it. They're sold by pound, right? Meat is sold by pound. So if we can fatten an animal up more, then we get more money, right? And more calories, which is part of the goal here. And so it's a completely different animal, literally and figuratively, from what our ancestors would have been exposed to. A wild deer, wild elk are mostly protein. There's a tiny bit of fat on there. But a factory farmed animal is mostly fat by calorie and by weight. And, chickens today, for example, are bred and fed to be morbidly obese when they're broilers, so when they're raised for meat. I was talking to actually a friend of mine who used to run a big chicken farm in North Carolina. He was telling me how their chickens were unable to walk. They get so fat. It's kind of the equivalent to if a human baby was engineered, bred, fed such that it weighed 900 pounds by the time it was 3 months old. That's how distorted these chickens are from anything natural. And so they can't walk. They're morbidly obese. They sit in their own poop all day long. And they lose their feathers because they develop these sores from lying in poop. 5% of the birds in his warehouse were dead before they were killed. So and they have a 1 square foot per bird. So if you walked around his warehouse, there's 5% of the birds are dead. They're lying in their own poop and they can't walk. And it's wall to wall birds. They never see the sun, never see a blade of grass. And he was forbidden by contract from ever letting them see the sunlight. And, or opening a window, because that would make them more active and reduce the feed conversion ratio and cost the company money. And tens of thousands of birds in that condition. He hated it, but he had to do it just to make a living, because that's what the industry norms are, and it's all about profits. Of course, this is horrendously cruel for the birds, but it also creates a product that is full of pathogenic bacteria, much of it antibiotic resistant, and that is hyper-inflammatory. The products of this system are really quite devastating to human health. So when you hear about all the studies showing that animal products are linked to higher rates of cancer, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, etc., it's very hard to know, is it the cow or is it the how? Because with an animal that's truly running around outside or wild or free, we just don't have data. We don't have long-term studies with people who've eaten animal products from that form. But the other thing, James, that I think is important to remember here is that we have a finite amount of resources and land and water and air and soil on this planet. And human beings are growing in numbers, and we're pillaging the planet. And it actually takes more total land ecosystem space to produce animals in grass-fed or pasture-raised settings. And 83% of the world's agricultural land right now is being used for livestock production, for 17% of the world's calories. So, and it takes more land to get a pound of meat from grass-fed. So the world can't really afford to go in that direction unless we cut down on our animal product consumption a lot. If we cut down enough, then absolutely whatever remains should be grass-fed, pasture-raised. The animals should see the sun. They should live as naturally as possible. They should peck around in the dirt if they're a bird. They should, get to live like animals are supposed to live on this planet as much as possible, but we're going to have to do it in much smaller quantities. And I just wanted to bring that in because I think it's important.
Absolutely. There's a twofold way of looking at this. One is how are we going to survive as a species, and how are we going to survive individually. One of the things you mentioned was you talked about the fat, and these animals are bred to be fat because the more they weigh, the more money the farmer will make. And we are also wired to like fat. We like sugar, fat, and that's natural because in the environment there is not much. If when I'm walking around in the jungle or the wild forest in a remote location, there's not many sources of fat and sugar. If you're walking around a supermarket or a fast food place, there's lots of sugar and fat, right? So we're wired to like this. But then what you said is these animals are fat, etc., and we're taught now that fat's bad, but fat is not really bad. It's the sort of what is in that fat. It's understanding that fat. So you can have things like, good quality fats like coconut oil or flaxseed or chia seeds or hemp seeds, and they're in these beautiful ratios of omega-3 to omega-9, and even, like you said, some animal products or wild products can have that more natural balance, but the types of fat, not all fat is equal, right? And certain types of fat, especially in these animals that are fed an unnatural diet that are inflamed, that fat is hyper damaging and feeding inflammation, and other fats actually fight inflammation. Can we speak about this omega-3, omega-9, how fat plays an important part in supporting an anti-inflammatory lifestyle?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, there are three major macronutrients, which are protein, carbs, and fat, essentially. And we get into a lot of arguments over what's the right ratio of the three macronutrients. And the truth is there are good carbs and bad carbs, good proteins and bad proteins, good fats and bad fats. And so it isn't just about the right ratio. Your body is very resilient. And in times of stress, you could eat mostly fat and do fine, or mostly carbs and do fine, or mostly protein and do fine. Though ultimately you want obviously a balance of all three to some extent. No one does well when you just cut one of those out altogether. But it really is about the quality, not just the quantity of each of those macronutrients. And with fat, the biggest problem we see, there's two types of fat that in general are causing a lot of problems. And each one of these has a lot of subvariants, to be clear. So we could say saturated fat causes a lot of problems, but there are a lot of different compounds that go into saturated fat. They're not all equal. The types of saturated fat you see in grain-fed animals from factory farms, are particularly damaging. Other types, maybe not so much. MCTs, medium chain triglycerides, are a particular type of saturated fat that's high in coconuts, and that turn out to potentially have tremendous benefit to brain health. Now, there are other saturated fats in coconut oil that I am more concerned about. So you want the MCTs, you don't necessarily want the other stuff. So then some people extract MCT oil, and the truth is we don't have enough data yet to know for sure what the long-term health impact of that is. I think it's promising. I think there's the potential that it could be beneficial, but we don't know for sure. We do know that omega-3 fatty acids have a lot to say for them, and omega-6 fatty acids are necessary, but most of us get way too much of them. So the ideal balance of omega-3 to omega-6 is about 1 to 3, maybe 1 to 4 potentially. Most of us are getting 1 to 16. 16 parts omega-6s to 1 part omega-3s. Omega-6s are inflammatory, omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. When you get a lot of omega-6s, you get a little bit, you get healthy inflammation. You get too much, and you can really damage your overall health and well-being. And that's what's happening in the modern world. Most of us are getting way too much omega-6 fatty acids and way too few omega-3s, and particularly the balance. Now, here's a fascinating thing. Omega-3s are actually more complex than just that. There's the big three omega-3s are EPA, DHA, and ALA. Okay, so ALA is the omega-3 that you can find most abundantly in the plant world. It's also the type, when grass-fed beef has omega-3s in it, it's got a little bit, not very much, of ALA. There's pretty much none in factory farmed meat. There's a little bit in grass-fed beef, a little bit in some eggs from chickens that were fed flax seeds, not much. But ALA is most readily available, and that's what you'll find in flax and chia seeds. Your body converts that into DHA and EPA. You need DHA and EPA for healthy brain function, for healthy vision, for all kinds of functions in your body. The only nutritional sources of getting EPA and DHA directly are coming from the ocean. Primarily, we're talking about algae and the fish that eat that algae, and also concentrated up the food chain. So fatty fish like salmon or sardines or herring are super high in omega-3s, specifically EPA and DHA. And that's because they get it from the algae. Unfortunately, we're strip mining the oceans. We're eating way more fish than our planet can sustain. We're farming over half our fish now, and that comes with its own ecological nightmares. And so it's a big concern. And while a few people can definitely eat wild fish, it's not something that we can continue to produce on the volume we are with the current human population. So a lot of people look to algae-sourced supplements to try to fill that gap, and then they're getting mercury-free, heavy metal-free sources of EPA and DHA that are more ecologically sustainable, it seems. There's no perfect answer here. You certainly may go with some wild fish as well if you want to, but that's a consideration. Or you can go for eating lots of flax seeds and chia seeds, which are really high in omega-3s and have a very favorable omega-3 to 6 ratio. And then your body will probably convert some of that into EPA and DHA. Now, here's a fascinating thing a lot of people don't realize. When you have too much omega-6 in your diet, you will convert EPA and DHA out of ALA less efficiently. So one of the reasons why you want to get that ratio right is to get your conversion ratio better. And here's another fascinating thing. Turmeric is a potent anti-inflammatory. And studies have found that people who are eating turmeric or taking curcumin supplements do a better job. Curcumin is the main active ingredient in turmeric. Do a better job converting ALA into EPA and DHA. It may be because their body has inflammation brought down by the turmeric. That's one theory. And that helps them to more effectively convert. Just by the same mechanism that too much omega-6s makes you convert less efficiently. We don't entirely know, but some people would say, therefore, that turmeric is a vegetarian's best friend.
Well, I mean, it's a medicine, and this is what we're missing in so much of our diets these days is medicine. And so how do we introduce more medicine to bring down inflammation to a natural, non-chronic state? But one of the things I just wanted to touch on during that whole sort of discussion there, and I've learned definitely some new things there about the body being able to create DHA and EPA, which is fantastic, is that one of the key ideas that I've sort of gravitated towards is that, you know, people try to focus on, well, I need this much carbs, this much protein, this much this, and I've become more of concerned about quality over what the product is, you know, what my balance is of protein and carbohydrate. And so I've sort of worked, and I've heard this term from a few people, and it's become a big part of me. It's this idea of being a qualitarian. I don't have hyper strict rules about what I can and can't eat. Some people who are vegan, and that's okay, and that's for health reasons, and that's potentially for environmental reasons or ethical reasons, and that's beautiful. Some people are whole food plant-based. Some people say whatever they might say, but I think the common ground for people that are health-based, because there's people that are vegan or vegetarian that are not very healthy as well, and we know this. So I think a common ground that we're moving towards is this idea of being a qualitarian, like understanding our food deeply. And if we're going to eat a certain product, making sure it's the highest quality product possible, even like nuts and seeds. Toxins, pesticides, herbicides are lipophilic. They're fat-loving. They concentrate in fat. That's why animal products, you do not want non-organic animal products. The toxins concentrate in the fat of egg or meat or whatever. Same with nuts and seeds too. So we need to take all of this learning and be a real quality-based approach to our food procurement, and less so, am I getting the right amount of protein in this? No. Is this great quality? Is this the best quality food that I can get? And your body can work so much more efficiently.
Well, it's true. And, you know, the average American gets about 500 too many calories per day, you know, more than we actually technically need or should be consuming. And one of the reasons for that is that most of us are calorie rich, but we're nutrient starved. We're not getting the nutrients that we really need, which is one of the factors that can create a perpetual sense of hunger. And I think that one of the steps we can take, people ask me, how can I save money or, you know, eat well without spending an arm and a leg? And I say, well, step number one is don't buy and eat food that you don't need. Like if you can actually, a moderate caloric restriction is one of the steps. And one of the ways you get there is by focusing on quality instead of quantity. And then you'll be less likely to binge late at night on potato chips because your cells will have what they need. And so that is really quite helpful, and it's a positive feedback loop. It doesn't happen overnight. Some people who have been used to eating 3,000 calories a day and they jump down to 2,200 feel a little hungry for a little while, but that will shift. One of the critical ingredients is to get lots of fiber. So fiber helps your body to clean out the bad stuff and get the what out of the system. But it also, soluble fiber and insoluble fiber each have their own function. And so between the two of them, you clear out like a broom all the stuff in your colon, but you also provide nutrition for the good bacteria in your gut. And that can also be anti-inflammatory. Less than 5% of the US population gets the recommended amount of fiber. And fiber contributes to a feeling of fullness in your belly. It kind of bulks you up. So studies have found that even, I know most folks watching are not big fans of gluten, but just stay with me for a second here. People who eat white flour bread feel hungry sooner than people who eat whole wheat flour bread. Just the presence of the fiber that's in the whole grain wheat creates a different impact in the belly. The same amount of bread. And one group of people is still just as hungry and the other group of people is not. And so that's critical. And so if you want to improve your digestive tract and your bacterial milieu and strengthen your microbiome, the number one thing you want to do is eat lots of good, healthy, plant-based fiber. And by the way, there's no fiber in any animal products. The only sources of fiber are whole plant foods.
100%. And you know, in thinking about this whole story, like the idea that, you know, reducing caloric intake, you know, it seems like, well, don't take my food away from me. But one of the studies that I was, you know, really introduced to from a longevity perspective was that in animal studies, they'd done this. I don't particularly agree with animal studies, but when calorie is restricted, the animals live longer. And what you see also in indigenous cultures is that there is this natural sort of restriction of calories because it's hard to attain. It's harder to attain food because we have this constant supply of food. Whereas to go, you know, even just the other week when I would go out into the gardens, into these wilderness with these remote tribes, it's a big effort to get food. You're doing exercise, you're getting sunlight, fresh air, you're barefoot, all these positive things. But when you collect food and then you harvest it, it's hard work. So you tend not to eat that much and you survive better on less food, and they just adapt to not eating as much, and they'll just, I didn't eat breakfast today, or I missed lunch and I just had a big dinner, because there was just a supply issue. They're not starving because they're getting very nutrient dense meals when they do eat them, which also speaks to another thing. There's all this craze about fasting and all this sort of thing, but we naturally had just little periods without much food in nature. We naturally had high fiber foods in nature, roots, tubers, nuts, seeds, these vegetables, fruits. That's all really high fiber. So it's really, the more we learn about science and look forward, the more we look back at the same time, Ocean, right? And we're like, science tells us this, and then we look back at an indigenous culture, we're like, oh, they're just doing that, right? They're eating less calories, they're eating high fiber, very rare animal products which are wild and they're not factory farmed or domesticated. Then there's this whole so it's really just this fascinating story of like future and ancient just sort of coming together with the research, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have this story of the hunter-gatherer, but the truth is they were gatherer-hunters, you know. I mean, gatherers first. Throughout the bulk of human history, obviously not in every ecosystem. The Eskimos are living off of animals throughout the winter, and that's probably as it should be in Alaska. But in most of the world, people have predominantly subsisted off of plants throughout most of human history. Obviously, it varies by region, but that's the general trend. And you know, with some supplementary animal products when they could get them in most places. But you know, I think that you're right that intermittent fasting is sort of this newfangled health craze, and it's really just eating with the rhythms of day and night. I mean, if you literally finish dinner around the time it's getting dark or before dark, and then you don't eat till the next morning, boom, you've got 12, 14 hours right there, you know? And if you wait a couple hours after you wake up and get going with the day, then 14, 15 hours and your eating window is shrunk. And that's what we're now hearing from some experts is really beneficial. So your belly can get some time off, so you can sleep deeply without being interrupted by the digestive process. And that's really healthy. It's like on and off. We need to get that rhythm going in our lives and also with our food. And if you're always eating, you kind of don't get that.
No, exactly. There's this constant stress on the digestive system, which reduces your energy, which puts it into a heavy state of overwhelm. And you talked a little bit about, okay, well, if you're eating more fibrous sort of foods like this whole meal flour compared to non-whole meal, then it fills you up more. Even though it's the same amount of calories, but not all calories are the same, right? And at Food Matters, we've done a lot of work in sort of raising a lot of awareness about the dangers of modern wheat and how much pesticides they spray on it, and the type of genetics that are in modern wheat, and then also looking at refined sugars and how unnatural that is to have these types of refined sugars in our diet. And we see these two key food groups, I would say processed, refined, hybridized or manipulated modern grains grown in mass in mainstream agriculture with lots of chemicals, and then we have refined sugar, and I see these as probably two of some of the most damaging products to people's health. Then you look at obviously factory farm animal products, including factory farm dairy. These things are but in particular the gluten and sugar. Are you with me on this? Are these highly inflammatory foods? Do these feed a whole systemic range of issues in the body? I just want to make sure that we're clear on this still.
Absolutely. So let's talk about sugar for a second specifically, because gluten's a little bit more complex. So sugar is highly inflammatory. So is white flour. So are most of the processed foods we see in the modern diet. I talked about meat earlier. That's a big one, and I wanted to focus there because I don't think it gets as much attention as it deserves. But there is no question that sugar and processed foods in general are extremely inflammatory. They spike blood sugar. They become addictive. They actually trigger dopamine hits in the brain that make us want more and crave more. They're bad for your gut bacteria. When you eat a high sugar diet, you literally feed those bacteria that love sugar, and those turn out to be the bad guys. Those are the ones that tend to create excessive inflammation in your body. And here's the really fascinating thing. When you feel hungry in your belly in response to certain food ideas or thoughts or experiences, is that you, or is it the bacteria in your gut that want that food? Because you're so connected. So when you eat a lot of sugar, the bacteria that love sugar are proliferating. And then they're saying, I want more sugar. And so this is part of how habits get formed. And if you feed the good guys, then over time, some people can literally learn to crave kale, broccoli, cabbage, carrots, onions. It's actually possible. And it actually, the bacteria are an often under thought about factor in what you crave when it comes to food. So feeding the good guys is critical and can be powerfully anti-inflammatory. And you got to get away from the sugar and the processed junk to do so. Now, gluten is a little bit more complex in my view. I agree with you about the issue with glyphosate, which is an endocrine disruptor. It's a probable carcinogen, and it's been patented as an antibiotic. It's the primary weed killer used in the world today, and it's primarily used in genetically engineered agriculture, GMO agriculture, where it's sprayed on crops that have been engineered to withstand it, mainly corn and soy, and then the plants live and the weeds die. But it's now being used as a desiccant to dry crops out before harvest, specifically and most significantly wheat, but also oats and barley and some other cereal crops. And the remedy here is going organic in terms of glyphosate. Non-GMO if you're talking about corn or soy, but organic across the board is the best way to be glyphosate free with your cereal crops, which includes an increasing number of grains and legumes, but wheat is the big one. If you want to avoid that. Now, then we've got all the ways that wheat has been bred in certain ways for certain characteristics. And so, spelt or kamut or other ancient grains that are what wheat kind of used to be, the old versions, may have very different effects on the body. So but they have lots of gluten. So do barley and rye. So I'm not entirely sure what are the mechanisms that are problematic, but I can say that 2% of our population has celiac disease, and for those folks, eating any gluten whatsoever, whether it's spelt or not, is a no-no. Absolutely. But another significant portion of people are gluten sensitive, and there's a lot of argument about what portion that is. I know people who think it's 100%. The research I'm familiar with is probably pegging it at more like 10 to 15%. But a surprising number of the people who have long-term health issues that are not solved by eating a predominantly whole foods, plant-centered diet and getting off the junk food and getting off most animal products, if they're still having issues, then some of them do really well to get off gluten altogether. And I highly recommend it if you're in that situation. Take 6 months off gluten, see how your body responds. Then if you want to, introduce it back and see if you notice any changes, any new symptoms. Could be headaches, could be digestive problems, could be all kinds of things that can show up. Fatigue, low energy. It can show up in a lot of different ways. Some of them are fairly subtle. Some of them are more dramatic. But I also think that there are studies showing that for some people, whole grains, including whole wheat, organic particularly, can actually be beneficial. I mean, gluten is a protein. And for some people, it can be a valuable source of protein, especially when it comes with fiber in a whole grain form. And I realize not everyone's going to agree with me about that. But again, I'm putting the caveat on it's certainly not for everybody. But I think for some people, we've got studies out there showing that, for example, whole wheat consumption is associated with lower rates of cancer and heart disease. That's probably because people are using it to replace animal products and white flour. So no big shock there, I suppose. You can find a study showing almost anything's good if you use it to replace something that's worse.
That's right.
And, so we have all these studies, for example, saying, is it better to eat more saturated fat or more sugar? As if that's the choice. And then they're like, oh my God, saturated fat's good for you. When you take sugar and you replace it with, factory farm meat, you get healthier. And it's like, well, it's not because factory farm meat's good for you. It's because sugar is so bad for you. If you replaced heroin with, or methamphetamines, with saturated fat, you do well too, right? So
totally.
It's all a matter of lesser of evils, I suppose. But if you really want to be optimally healthy, then base your diet around whole plant foods. And I think that gluten is subjective to the individual.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I guess the problem is that most gluten is in highly refined processed carbohydrates that we see in the supermarkets and non-organic, which is the issue. And also, I think one thing I want to speak to, I love this idea of the ancient grains. They're making a big revival. And I think what we need to be sympathetic to is understanding how our ancestors used to work with grains. There was a lot of soaking, there was a lot of fermenting, these long ferments, and they had a process to be able to work with grain to make it more digestible. They had a natural understanding of how to do that. And we typically just move to industrial production of grains, even some of these ancient grains. So, but taking it out can help to repair the gut. And another thing I've noticed, and I know that we're aligned on this, is as you start to heal your body, heal your gut, you can reintroduce certain food groups again and not be as responsive to that because your body is less in a state of fight or flight in terms of being constantly reacting to things. Often people that have gut issues will test allergic with an IgG test, the blood test, to so many foods. But then once they heal the gut, those allergies start to go away. So it's sort of bring the body back to balance, reduce and eliminate a lot of these foods that are causing inflammation, then start feeling back into a natural diet, and it'll evolve for you over time. Now, okay, we're going to get to a list of foods at the end here. I really want to go through a big list of anti-inflammatory foods. But what I want to speak about before we get to that is we're speaking all about inflammation, but what are some of the other non-food or lifestyle type influences that can impact inflammation? We've just speaking about foods and fat and protein and grains and sugar. What are things outside of food that can impact inflammation negatively and or positively?
Well, the big one is stress. I mean, when you're in a state of chronic stress and agitation, then you're in hyper alert, you're in hyper reactivity. And a lot of us have, frankly, been impacted by trauma of some kind at some point in our lives, which when there isn't a resolution to that systemically can create chronic stress. And some traumas are big traumas, a life-threatening situation, domestic violence, things like that. But there's also smaller scale traumas, like dealing with a boss who, is mean to you day in and day out, for years, or an abusive relationship that may not be physically abusive, but maybe it's even just emotionally abusive, or just not feeling respected, or feeling stressed out, working way too hard for way too long, without feeling volition over where your time and energy are going. So there's all kinds of traumas that can impact our lives that put us in a state of chronic stress. And what I mean by that is that even when the stress is over, you're still stressed out. That's when there's some kind of traumatic impact. And then you're never getting a break. Because if you can respond to a stress, somebody's mean to you and you protect yourself, great. But if somebody's mean to you and you protect yourself, but then you're constantly defensive and you're rehearsing angry responses to them for the next 3 years, then that's on you. That's not on them anymore. And so resolving those kinds of things is easier said than done, obviously. But there are a lot of paths, from emotional healing work to personal growth work to spiritual practice, mindfulness, that can help us to resolve those kinds of unfinished business in our lives. Eventually, you want to be able to say that was then and this is now. Or you want to be able to say that's them and this is me, and have a clear sense of distinction there between them and you, between history and present, so that you are able to respond effectively to what's actually here in your life now. Another factor in inflammation chronically is lack of sleep. A lot of us get so busy and stressed out and worn out in the modern world. We're constantly doing. And we don't take time for the being, for the replenishing, for the dropping. And this particularly shows up with poor sleep quality. And so if you find yourself tossing and turning, or struggling to sleep, or not sleeping as much as would be good for you, then it's time to really take that seriously. This isn't an afterthought. It needs to be a central part of your life. So critical things are not eating within several hours of bedtime, not having blue light, like computers especially, or even TVs, within a couple hours before bedtime. This is helpful for getting your brain in a calmer state. If you've ever gone camping and been outside and found yourself naturally wanting to go to sleep like way earlier, once it gets dark, you have a little campfire. I did this recently. I camped out for a night, and by 9:30 at night, I was just like, I couldn't wait to get in the tent and go to sleep, because it was cold and it was dark. There wasn't a heck of a lot to do, but also my nervous system was totally settled down. And I have a Fitbit, which I wear, which kind of gives me a sleep score every night. It was the highest sleep score I've had in months. And I don't think it's any accident that I was more connected to the natural rhythms of the world, which connected me to my own natural rhythms. So taking that time to de-stress, to calm down, to have dim light before bed, stay off the computers. If you want to do some kind of mindfulness practice or meditation, or even just write down 5 things you're grateful for before you go to sleep, you can just drift off with a state of calm and peace. And then don't wake up and look at an electronic device first thing. Don't jump on your phone. In fact, have a rule that you've got to wake up, stretch, remember your dreams, chill out, get out of bed, go pee before you're even allowed to think about checking your emails. It's a nice way to settle yourself in, because otherwise you'll wake up sometimes in a state of, what do I need to do now? What do I need to do now? And sometimes you do that and it's 4 o'clock in the morning. And then you're like, I missed my clock. I'm a little off here. And so creating that natural deep respect for the cycles of day and night and rest and replenishment and prioritizing it is critically important. So these are some of the other factors. And then, of course, exercise. We talk about it all the time, but it's true. Exercise also helps your body to have that, it's on and off. So exercising leads to better sleep, especially in the morning. Getting sunshine in the morning leads to better sleep at night. So get your circadian rhythm set. If you can start the day with a bang, have a hot and cold shower. Cold showers are awesome. And then get a nice run in the morning, get some sunshine in the morning, and then again wind down before bed. These are all things that statistically are correlated to deeper sleep. And deeper sleep is correlated to longer life expectancy and lower rates of inflammation.
I love it. And actually, you really hit the nail on the head, should I say, when you said you noticed this about when you went out in nature and you spent time in nature, because what's the color of a fire? It's not a blue light, it's this deep amber red light, which tells you time for bed, sunset, it's getting dark, you know. And then you were probably barefoot on the ground. There's a lot of research about being barefoot and how that helps to reduce inflammation markers in the body and help to sort of de-stress the body, also breathing fresh air. So nature is the healer. And this is such a common thread about all the most cutting edge science. It's like, go back to nature, and yet we're destroying nature. And this is the real juxtaposed position we're in. The more we destroy nature, the more we destroy our healer, our real healer. And it heals us in so many ways. When you're in nature, you can't be stressed. You can't be so resentful or bitter or unforgiving. You're grateful. It's just this natural state of being, which aligns specifically with this anti-inflammatory type lifestyle you talked about, which is fascinating and interesting and makes sense.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's look at it. Let's look at some foods. I want to look at a list of foods as your Ocean Robbins and the Robbins family top anti-inflammatory foods. These are sort of key nutrients and key superfood stars that are the most powerful. I always look for this too. I remember there's a big phase in the early 2005, 7, 8 when Food Matters first came out. It was all about superfoods, and in a way it still is. These are nature's special gifts, special medicine that Mother Nature has provided for us. What are your top foods for sort of fighting inflammation and supporting overall systemic health in the body, taking all of our conversation into consideration today?
Oh my goodness, there are so many. Let's go over them. So raw cacao is one I've got to talk about. It was called the food of the gods by the ancient Aztecs. And raw cacao has over 300 enlivening compounds, many of which are strongly anti-inflammatory. It has 20 times the antioxidant power of blueberries, and it's packed with vitamins and minerals. Now, that doesn't mean you should go out and start chomping down on candy bars. For the optimal benefits, you want to seek out unprocessed and preferably unsweetened or minimally sweetened cacao. Now, cacao is kind of bitter by itself. So usually people like to have some sweet with it, but you can toss it into a smoothie. Or if you want to go for a chocolate bar, then make sure that it is organic and fair trade, because there's a lot of child labor in the chocolate industry that I don't think anybody who is ethically minded wants to support with their financial dollars. So make sure it's fair trade. And dark chocolate, at least 70% cacao is best, and raw is optimal. But it's pretty awesome, isn't it, that chocolate's good for us, turns out?
Yes.
Next would be acai berries. Acai is a low-sugar fruit that has extremely high antioxidant potency, and it's been found to decrease inflammation in the body as well as to speed up your body's metabolism. So, acai berries are usually, unless you live in the tropics, they're probably something you'll find like in little smoothie packets, or you may be able to get some in the frozen section of a natural food store. Some people get them dried. That's kind of silly, I think. Better to get fresh ones. But they're pretty awesome, and they're similar to blueberries in taste and effect. And you can go with blueberries too, by the way. They're awesome. They don't make the cut here for the top few, but they're wonderful. Leafy greens are, oh my God, what health problem don't they help with? Leafy greens are good for just about every issue under the sun. And it turns out that they're also awesome with inflammation, especially cruciferous leafy greens, kale and cabbage and collards. Oh my gosh, bok choy, so good for you. You can put them in salads, you can steam them, you can cook them in soups, saute them, just so many wonderful things.
You're stressing diversity here too. You're not just saying spinach or broccoli. You're saying leafy greens, so green vegetables. There just seems to be this broad range of green vegetables and different ways of consuming them. So getting adventurous with that.
Absolutely. So good. So good. By the way, a bonus tip here, sulforaphane, my favorite compound of the month here. So sulforaphane is a compound that is actually not in foods per se. It's something that your body makes when two things are combined, glucosinolates and myrosinase. Myrosinase is an enzyme, and glucosinolates are found only in cruciferous vegetables. which are also a lot of the leafy greens. It's really high in broccoli sprouts and broccoli seeds in particular, but it's also quite high in mustard greens. It's high in bok choy, pretty high in cabbage, decent amount in kale and collards. So glucosinolates and myrosinase have this potent combination. You have myrosinase probably in your gut. So if you eat cooked cruciferous veggies, you will probably be able to manufacture sulforaphane, or the bacteria in your gut will do so for you. But if it doesn't hurt to get some raw ones. So even adding a tablespoon of shredded cabbage to some steamed veggies can help you make sure you're getting the myrosinase that you need to produce sulforaphane. Now, sulforaphane is an incredible compound when it comes to fighting cancer and fighting inflammation. It's also good for brain health. It's good for basically every function in the body. Some companies are now manufacturing, combo packs like supplements, or even one company has made an actual sulforaphane supplement that's shelf stable. More power to them. That's great. It hasn't all been studied yet in that form, but we have a lot of studies showing that this may be one of the miracle compounds in leafy greens, is the sulforaphane we get from them. And so the pro tip here is to get a little bit of raw in the mix if you really want the maximal benefit. Yeah.
Nice.
Let's talk about maca. It's a South American root. It's been used for thousands of years as an elixir for vitality. It's often consumed in a powder. It's one of the most potent and intelligent hormone regulators. Helps you to have balanced hormones. And it also has tremendous antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. Maca's not widely used, but it's a increasingly popular superfood.
And it tastes delicious. It tastes delicious in smoothies too. It's got this sort of caramel, rich, beautiful flavor. Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. But let's not forget about turmeric. It's probably really should be number one on the list. It is an anti-inflammatory superstar. We have thousands of studies on turmeric and its anti-inflammatory properties. Curcumin is one of the most primary and potent compounds in turmeric, and it has tremendous anti-inflammatory properties. Research has demonstrated that curcumin is beneficial for prevention and treatment of arthritis and general aches and pains, as well as type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, depression, heart disease, and cancer. We have literally thousands of studies showing this. So you can eat turmeric just straight away. In India, it's widely consumed, and the average Indian's getting at least a teaspoon a day of turmeric on average across the whole entire country of 1 billion plus people. And this may be one of the reasons why they have one of the lowest rates of Alzheimer's in the world. Half the population of India is also vegetarian. That could be a factor as well. Maybe it's a combination of the two, but their rates are vastly lower, even after adjusting for age and life expectancy, than we have in the United States. Turmeric may be a big part of it. And if you want to get turmeric and actually make it bioavailable, then you can't just eat it straight. You want to combine it with some black pepper and or some source of fat. So a lot of Indian curries, traditionally, they're using some, coconut oil or ghee or some other kind of fat in there, and they're also using black pepper in there, and that's always part of the mix. So you can take a page out of that book. Even a little black pepper sprinkled in along with your turmeric can do wonders. You can eat it fresh and make turmeric juice. You can grind it up. You can blend it into smoothies. You can use the powder. Pretty awesome stuff. Or you can take a supplement that's got curcumin as well if you want to. And then and
let's not forget
also
about
from the Indian subcontinent perspective, they'll make like a warm coconut milk with turmeric, with pepper, with some other spices. So you've got the fat from the coconut milk, you've got the turmeric, you've got the pepper, and you've got other spices in there as well. So there's in all traditions, there's these ancient medicinal elixirs that are just integrated. We call it like a turmeric latte now at Food Matters, and we introduce it in a lot of our recommendations. But there's so much knowledge locked up in this, isn't there? It's just beautiful. I love turmeric. Definitely a big fan. Let's keep going.
Okay, just absolutely. So many good things. So next up would be ginger. Researchers have shown that ginger has tremendous anti-inflammatory properties. It's been found to be helpful with rheumatoid arthritis, with osteoarthritis, and with migraine headaches, actually. In fact, in one study, ginger was more effective with migraine headaches than any of the major drugs that are prescribed for migraines on the market today. There's a compound called 6-gingerol, one of the active components in ginger, that is particularly potent as an anti-inflammatory. It's spicy, like turmeric. It's got a lot of flavor. So, you want to use it in the right ways, but ginger can be really delicious, as we know from gingerbread cookies. But you can add it to smoothies too, or add it as a seasoning. We like to blend up. Sometimes you can blend up ginger with some water, because it's hard and tough, so it's a little bit tough to use. Then you have like a paste or a liquid slurry kind of that you can add to foods really easily. You can freeze those in an ice cube tray and then just pop out one at a time, add it to foods, and it'll just melt right up. So those are some tips. Ginger's fun. And then last but certainly not least, I talked earlier about omega-3 fatty acids. So they're anti-inflammatories in a big way. They're also good for your brain. They regulate your mood, your cardiovascular health. They balance hormone production, and they help fight cancer. So omega-3s are wonderful, particularly here, talking about flax seeds and chia seeds. Grind them up in a coffee grinder if you like, and sprinkle them on things. Don't let them get rancid, but use them, fairly quickly. But you can grind up another batch every week. You can make a combo, put the two together, pretty cool. Put it in your oatmeal. Toss it into a casserole. Ideally have them raw if you can. You can cook them a little bit, but if they get cooked a lot, then some of the properties dissipate or get changed. Smoothies work well. They're big water hogs, chia and flax seeds. So just be aware of that from a culinary perspective. If you make like a big smoothie like I do and leave it sitting in the fridge, because sometimes I make batches, I make 3 days worth at a time just for efficiency's sake, and then leave them in jars, they'll get really thick. But that's okay. I can handle it. Just be forewarned. But chia and flax seeds are pretty fabulous in that way. And then, if you're going to eat fish, make sure it's low mercury, wild if possible, or you can go with algae source DHA and EPA, which are fabulous from the omega-3 perspective and really good for your brain as well.
Nice. And just generally a little thing to add there, if you're thinking low mercury fish, it's the smaller the better, essentially, because the mercury tends to concentrate up the food chain. So sardines or anchovies would be lower compared to like tuna or mackerel or larger fish, if you're considering that source. Ocean, great list. I love it. I love that raw cacao's on there. I was actually going through a forest the other day, picking fresh cacao fruit off, and it was my first experience eating a raw cacao fruit. You suck this soft white flesh around the bean, and we dried some beans, and then we sort of gently sun-dried them, and some we roasted a little bit, some we just used them sun-dried and raw, and we also ate some just straight off the tree, and they're so bitter, but this speaks to this idea of bitter medicine. All medicinal foods tend to have this bitter, powerful, spicy component. A lot of what you spoke about today has that feeling in it. So concur completely. Yeah. Nature is the healer and there to support us. So finally, last thing, if people are feeling a little bit overwhelmed from today's interview, you tend to just walk through your life without any overwhelm whatsoever. You've got so much research at your fingertips. You've done years of research, and then you just effortlessly cruise through your kitchen and your day. How do you advise people to sort of take all this anti-inflammatory information and lifestyle just into a simple daily life plan of how do you do it, just to break it down a little bit for people?
Oh my goodness. Well, crowd out the bad stuff with the good stuff, and also get the bad stuff out of your kitchen. Take a look at where you're eating right now and where your calories are coming from, and see if you can cut off the flow of bad stuff into your life. So if you eat out at restaurants a lot, then change which restaurants you eat out at, and maybe see if you can prepare food at home more. If you mostly do prepare food at home, then plan ahead and get the bad stuff out of your kitchen. If you live in a shared household with other people who don't eat the way you do, then create some actual segmentation, like make some clear boundaries, tell them what you do and don't want to eat, ask for their help, and then have different shelves if you need to, or different cupboards, and so that that you're just going to go to the places that are the things that you want to eat. The best way to not eat potato chips or cookies late at night when you get a little off center is by not having them around. Don't buy stuff and you're a lot less likely to eat it. So change what you buy, change where you shop, change the influences around you, and then create some healthy habits. Find some nutrient-rich recipes that feature foods that you want to eat more of, and bring them into your starting rotation. It takes a lot more time to make a recipe you've never made before than to make something that's familiar that you've made 1,000 times that you grew up eating. And so a lot of people get stuck there. The thing is that making new habits takes time and energy, but it gets easier and easier. And eventually you want to be on autopilot. You want to have the recipe memorized. You want to know it like the back of your hand. And if you run out of a key ingredient, you don't even have to practically put it on the shopping list, because you just know that that's something you need. But there are certain foods that you're going to want to have in your home all the time. Legumes, nuts, seeds, vegetables, fruits. You want to get those things so that they're always in your kitchen, always available, and then put them to use, obviously. I find that cooking in quantity is a really big time saver and energy saver, because it doesn't take nearly as long. It doesn't take twice as long to make twice as much food. So if you can freeze some and have some leftovers for later, that's great. Make friends with leftovers. They really got to be your friend here. I know we got this kind of second-rate story about them, but the truth is that they are paying it forward to the future of your life. And if you can make friends with them and repurpose things, the same casserole could be dinner one day, lunch the next day, and breakfast the next day. But then fix it up a little differently and add a little something special to it. Add a different sauce or make staples. We always have sprouted beans going on in our house. And then we cook them in big quantities, and then we put them in the fridge. And there's always some grains cooked that we sprouted, and then some quinoa, some millet, some buckwheat perhaps. There's always some lentils or some legumes in the fridge, and then some steamed veggies. And then we're combining them in different quantities with cool sauces, and you got different meals. And making friends with sauces is big too. So the possibilities are limitless. It just takes putting one foot in front of the other and taking steps. But don't make the perfect into the enemy of the good. If you slip, if you fall down, just love yourself a whole lot and then get back up and keep going. Because this isn't about perfection. This is about moving forward. It's not about some radical new diet plan. It's about changing the course and the trajectory of your life so you have healthy habits that feed you and nourish you and help you to live the life of your dreams.
Beautiful. I love it. And your concept of cook once, eat 2 or 3 times is fantastic. I'm a huge proponent of that. You're a force for good, Ocean. You and your entire family. It's like you've been delivered to humanity to help us reconnect with the ancient ways of eating in a natural environment. And it's always an honor to speak with you. I've learned so much today. And as I always do, hearing from you as you accumulate more and more knowledge and research and make it practical for people. Thank you so much for your time and the work that you do. It's such a great honor to speak with you again. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, James. Great to be with you too.